At some point today, you will touch something made in China. Your phone, your shoes, the screws inside your laptop. Not because China conquered the world, not because it threatened anyone, but because quietly, patiently, it made itself unavoidable. Here's the uncomfortable truth. China didn't become the world's factory by being the cheapest. It did it by building a system so efficient that opting out now feels almost impossible. And that matters more today than ever. Because for the first time in decades, countries are asking a dangerous question. What happens if this system breaks? To understand how we got here, we need to rewind to a moment when China was poor. Not developing country poor, actually poor. In 1978, China's economy was smaller than Italy's. The average Chinese citizen earned less than $2 a day. Most people worked on farms. Factories were outdated. Exports barely existed. China wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a competitor. Then, something strange happened. China didn't try to beat the world at innovation. It didn't try to lead in technology. It didn't try to spread ideology. Instead, it asked a much simpler question. What if we just made things for everyone? At the time, the global system looked like this. Rich countries designed products. Poorer countries made parts of them. China wanted in, but it didn't want to be just another low-cost workshop. So it made a quiet deal with the world. Foreign companies could come in, build factories, hire millions of workers, export to anywhere. In return, China would offer something no democracy could offer: speed. Land approvals in weeks, not years. Infrastructure built before factories even opened. Ports, roads, power plants, entire cities designed around production. This wasn't capitalism, it wasn't socialism, it was something else. A state that behaved like a logistics company. By the early 1990s, global brands noticed something odd. China wasn't just cheaper, it was smoother. When a factory in Mexico shut down, it took months to replace suppliers. When one shut down in China, another one across the street picked up the slack. Because China didn't build factories, it built clusters. If you wanted to make shoes, you didn't just get a shoe factory. You got rubber suppliers, lace manufacturers, packaging plants, ports, shipping agents, all within a few kilometers. It was like Amazon fulfillment centers before Amazon existed. And once this system started, it fed on itself. More factories meant more workers. More workers meant more skills. More skills meant better output. Better output meant more global orders. By 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization. This is where everything accelerated. Overnight, China became safe for global trade. Tariffs dropped, rules standardized, orders exploded. Within 5 years, China became the world's largest exporter, not because it forced anyone, but because companies kept choosing it. Here's the uncomfortable math. A company choosing China could lower production costs by 20 to 40%, scale production faster, ship globally with fewer delays, and rely on a government that guaranteed stability, even if it wasn't democratic. Boards don't vote on morality, they vote on margins, and China understood that better than anyone. But here's where the story gets misunderstood. China didn't just assemble cheap goods forever. It used the factory phase as training. Every iPhone assembled, every engine component produced, every machine tool copied, studied, improved. Over time, Chinese factories didn't just follow instructions, they started optimizing them. By the 2010s, China wasn't just the factory, it was the factory manager. It controlled supply chains from raw materials to final assembly. It controlled shipping. It controlled intermediate components, the boring parts no one pays attention to, like ball bearings, circuit boards, industrial chemicals. These aren't glamorous, but without them, nothing works. At its peak, China produced around 30% of global manufacturing output, more than the US, Japan, and Germany combined, and it did it without firing a single shot. But there was a price. The same system that made China rich made others dependent. When COVID hit, the world discovered this the hard way. Factories shut down, ships stopped moving. Suddenly, countries couldn't get masks, or chips, or basic medicines. Politicians called it a supply chain crisis. But it wasn't a crisis, it was a revelation. For decades, the world optimized for cost, not resilience, not independence, cost. China didn't force this dependence, it quietly benefited from it. Now comes the irony. As China grew richer, it became more expensive. Wages rose, environmental rules tightened, geopolitical tension increased. In theory, factories should have left. Some did. Vietnam, Bangladesh, India. But something strange happened. They couldn't fully replace China. Because you can move a factory, you can't easily move an ecosystem. A supplier network built over 30 years doesn't teleport. Ports don't magically appear. Skilled labor doesn't scale overnight. So companies did something awkward. They diversified on paper, but kept China as the backbone. China went from being the cheapest option to being the default option. That's power. Not loud power, quiet power. And this is where the story gets uncomfortable again. China never needed to threaten war. It never needed to block trade routes. It simply made itself essential. When tensions rise, companies hesitate, not because they love China, but because replacing it would cost billions and take years. This is economic gravity. The question now isn't how China became the world's factory. That already happened. The question is whether the world can afford to unbuild it. Governments are trying. Subsidies, reshoring, friendshoring. But here's the hidden mechanism most people miss. Manufacturing isn't just about factories, it's about time. Time to train workers, time to debug processes, time to fail cheaply. China had decades of uninterrupted focus. No election cycles, no policy reversals every 4 years. That consistency mattered. And now the system faces its biggest test. China wants to move up the value chain. Less assembly, more design, more technology. The rest of the world wants to move production out, slowly, carefully, without crashing prices or supply. Both goals collide. Which raises a final, uncomfortable question. If China built the world's factory without starting a war, what happens if the world tries to unbuild it without one? Because supply chains don't break cleanly, they snap. And when they do, the shock doesn't stay in factories. It shows up in prices, jobs, politics. And the next time you hold something made in China, the real question isn't where it came from. It's whether the world still knows how to live without it.